Capital punishment. The state-sponsored killing of prison inmates is the ultimate, irreversible punishment for their crimes. Since the resumption of its implementation in 1982, the state of Texas has executed 560 people. Last year, Texas accounted for more than half of all executions nationwide. To date, in 2019, Texas is responsible for the deaths of 2/3 of all prison inmates, with more scheduled to occur throughout the year. The executions are assured through the use of a lethal injection of a respiratory depressant and paralytic, meaning the inmates suffocate and are helpless, as the primary right of human life, the right to live, is taken from them. As the national leader of this barbaric practice, the state of Texas sets a standard for the country. Texas needs to cease its implementation of the inhumane riddance of human, albeit criminal, lives.
Charles Brooks Jr. was the first person to be executed by lethal injection on December 7, 1982, Huntsville, Texas. On December 14, 1976, Charles Brooks went to a used car parking lot and asked if he could test drive a car for a spin. The mechanic working that day was a man named David Gregory, who accompanied Brooks to his test drive. During the test drive, Brooks picked up his partner, a man named Woody Ludris, and soon after they threw the mechanic in the trunk of the car and took him to a motel. In that motel, they bound Gregory to a chair with coat hangers, gagged him with tape, and then shot him point blank in the head. But after, Brooks and Loudress were both convicted of the crime, and neither of them would confess. Both men were punished. One was sentenced 40 years in prison, and the other one was death penalty. Carlos de Luna. In 1989, a man named Carlos de Luna, a Hispanic man with low income, was put to death for the stabbing of a convenience store clerk named Wanda Lopez in the chest with a lock blade buck knife. His execution went unnoticed for many years until a team at the Columbia Law School accidentally stumbled upon and decided to investigate his case. They found out that throughout his entire trial he pleaded that he was innocent and even told prosecutors that he was not the one who committed the crime. He stated that he knew who the culprit was, a man named Carlos Hernandez. By no coincidence, they were the same height and weight, and some people would even mistake them for twins. Even de Luna's sister, Rose, got them mixed up. But how did the court rule Hernandez as a phantom, who simply did not exist? Just a figure of de Luna's imagination? 4 years after his execution, the Professor Liebman hired a private investigator for just one day. And at the end of that single day, he dug up uncovered evidence that had eluded scores of Texas prosecutors, defense lawyers, and police officers between de Luna's execution and his arrest, showing that Carlos Hernandez was no phantom. The investigators started to piece together all the evidence piece by piece until they put together that he had a huge criminal past, was an alcoholic with a violent past, and was known to always carry a lock blade buck knife.
Even though there are no fingerprints, no physical evidence linking him to the scene, he becomes the lone suspect.
December 23rd, 1991. A mysterious fire breaks out in the nursery of the Willingham residence. The flames soon engulf and destroy the entire home, taking the lives of the 3 children inside. The father, Cameron Todd Willingham, was found outside with relatively minor burns. Investigation led to the conviction of Willingham for arson and the murder of his children, and he was sentenced to death. During his trial, Willingham denied a life sentence in exchange for a guilty plea, maintaining his innocence. But recent studies have shown that the initial investigation was flawed, and that it was very possible that the fire that killed Willingham's children may have been accidental. Arson expert Gerald Hurst said there is nothing to suggest to any reasonable arson investigator that this was an arson fire. It was just a fire. Investigators had no scientific evidence determining the fire as intentional or accidental. Later, after Willingham was sentenced to death, it was found that a man who was in Willingham's jail cell with him lied to help the prosecutors convict Willingham. He told the prosecutors that Willingham murdered his children in an attempt to cover up domestic abuse. A few years later, in 2010, the court ruled that the state of Texas wrongfully executed Cameron Todd Willingham. Wrongful execution should not be a possibility. The destruction of human life is a travesty in and of itself, nevertheless when it comes unnecessarily.
In his arms, he began drop to one knee, and as he began to drop to one knee, the little girl's arm just fell limp right at her side, just like a little rag doll.
I went back to the fire room looking for the children. At that time, Chief Fogg was in there, and he had already located the children, but they were both dead.
Firefighters tried to save 2-year-old Amber, but she died shortly after reaching the hospital. All 3 children, Amber, Carmen, and Cameron, were dead. Their mother, Stacy, was Christmas shopping at a thrift store when the police told her.
In the blackened ugliness, there are remnants of a fire. There are remnants of Christmas as well. A melted Christmas tree with a few ornaments, a teddy bear still waiting for Christmas morning. And there are 2 parents who want this Christmas to go away.
Oh, when I woke up, the whole house was smoke.
Firefighters tried to save 2-year-old Amber, but she died shortly after reaching the hospital. All 3 children, Amber, Carmen, and Cameron, were dead. Their mother, Stacy, was Christmas shopping at a thrift store when the police told her.
In the blackened ugliness, there are remnants of a fire. There are remnants of Christmas as well. A melted Christmas tree with a few ornaments, a teddy bear still waiting for Christmas morning. And there are 2 parents who want this Christmas to go away.
The little girl was crying, "Daddy, Daddy." When I woke up, the whole house was in smoke.
Todd Willingham was virtually unharmed.
He did have some minor burns on his shoulder, and his hair was singed. To me, it just was not, the injuries were not consistent of being in a burning house that was so supposedly burning so bad that he had to get out and couldn't find his kids.
Cameron Todd Willingham was put to death by lethal injection by the state of Texas on February 17, 2004. They said he set the fire that killed his 3 little daughters in Corsicana, Texas, 2 days before Christmas in 1991, a fire he escaped from.
There's smoke damage in this room. There's some heat damage in this room.
Here, in a video taken a few days after that fire, investigators walked through the house, trying to figure out what happened.
This is the bed where the 2-year-old was found in the middle of the bed.
They looked for clues they thought the fire left behind, and those clues, they decided, meant only one thing. The fire was deliberately set, and Todd Willingham was the man who set it. Doug Fogg was one of those arson investigators.
You remain very confident.
Oh, yeah.
That this was arson.
Totally.
But that conclusion is now widely acknowledged by top fire investigators and scientists throughout the country to be deeply flawed.
Do you believe that the state of Texas executed an innocent man?
I do.
David Gran is a reporter for The New Yorker magazine. His recent story showed in damning detail that the investigative techniques used to send Todd Willingham to his death have now been discredited by modern science.
This fire has now been examined multiple times by separate of the leading fire investigators in the country. Each one has concluded that there is absolutely no evidence of arson or that a crime ever occurred.
Last month, an official report to the Texas Forensic Science Commission, a state panel reviewing the Willingham case, blasted the arson investigation as nothing more than a collection of personal beliefs that have nothing to do with science-based fire investigation. And even the original prosecutor in the trial admits the foundation of his case that arson killed those children is now undermined.
You would agree that this report from the Texas Forensic Science Commission calls into very serious question the methodology and the way this arson investigation.
Without question.
That it really has a problem.
That the techniques used were flawed.
Deeply.
Yes.
But John Jackson still insists he sent a guilty man to the death chamber.
Some of the evidence was certainly less credible than I would have liked to see.
And doesn't that give you pause at all about sending a man to death?
not a man like Todd.
A man like Todd. Todd Willingham was certainly a man from the wrong side of the tracks, a man with a criminal record, mostly drug offenses and a robbery. His wife Stacy said Todd had beaten her, including when she was pregnant. To the prosecutor, that history of spousal abuse was key.
The best evidence to me is not the investigation of the arson. The best evidence that I believe I